On a bitter November night in 1994, in a small New England town called Keene, Bonnie Hunt watched Robin Williams walk out of a diner, reach into his coat, and quietly slide an envelope across the counter to a waitress who wasn't supposed to see it coming. Snow was falling outside the window, the kind that muffled every sound on Main Street, and inside the diner smelled of burnt coffee and wet wool coats hung too close to the radiator. He didn't wait for a thank you. He was already halfway out the door, laughing at something one of the crew had said, as if nothing had happened at all. Bonnie stood frozen by the register for a moment, unsure whether she was meant to have seen it. She never told a reporter about that night. She barely told her own family. For 30 years, she carried that small, ordinary moment as one of the truest things she ever knew about Robin Williams. Truer, she would say, than any interview clip or magazine profile ever printed. This is the story behind that envelope, and behind 100 moments like it, that a woman who stood beside him on the set of Jumanji has finally decided to tell. Bonnie Hunt was 30 years old when she got the call that she'd been cast as Sarah Whittle, the girl all grown up, the woman still haunted by a game she never should have played. She had done comedy before, sharp and quick, the kind of quick-witted charm that had made her a favorite on late-night television. But this role asked for something else, something quieter, a woman carrying 26 years of guilt behind her eyes. She was nervous walking onto the Soundstage at Sony Pictures Studios in Culver City for the first time, past the enormous fabricated jungle, past vines built from steel and silk that stretched 3 stories into the rafters, past crew members hauling fake boulders on dollies. And then she saw him. Robin Williams, already in costume, hair wild, sitting cross-legged on a fake tree root, doing an impression of the animatronic rhino that technicians were still calibrating 20 feet away, complete with a strained, honking rhino voice that had 3 grips doubled over. He caught her eye, stopped mid-bit, and said something so disarming, so instantly kind, that every ounce of her nervousness simply dissolved. She would say later that within 30 seconds of meeting him, she felt like she had known him her whole life. That was the gift he gave people before he ever gave them anything material. He gave them ease. The Jumanji set was, by every account, a strange and exhausting place to work. Director Joe Johnston had built a production around chaos itself, a stampede of computer-generated elephants and rhinos that had to be timed against real actors running for their lives on a soundstage floor. Giant mechanical mosquitoes on hydraulic arms that hissed and clicked between takes. A monsoon rig that could drop 4,000 gallons of water on command at the flip of a switch. Between takes, actors stood soaked, cold, wrapped in towels that crew members handed out like blankets on a battlefield, waiting for technicians to reset rigs that sometimes took 40 minutes to reload, while everyone stood shivering under the soundstage lights. It was in those dead stretches, the ones that could have curdled into misery, that Bonnie watched Robin become something like the unofficial heartbeat of the crew. He would climb onto an apple box and do 15 minutes of pure improvisation, becoming the rhino, becoming Joe Johnston, becoming a bewildered grip who'd been up since 4 in the morning drinking cold coffee out of a thermos. Nobody asked him to. He simply couldn't stand to see 200 tired people standing in silence, shivering, staring at their watches, willing the rig to reset faster. Bonnie remembered watching grown men who built rigs for a living wipe tears of laughter off their faces, still soaked to the bone, still exhausted, suddenly forgetting they were cold at all. But it was the quieter moments that stayed with her longest, the ones that happened when the cameras weren't anywhere near him. There was a set dresser on the crew, a man in his 40s named Mike, who had been unusually withdrawn for several days that autumn, snapping at people who didn't deserve it, eating lunch alone instead of with the rest of the carpenters. Bonnie noticed it. Robin noticed it faster. He pulled the man aside during a lighting setup, not with a joke this time, just a quiet question. "Are you all right, brother?" And he waited, actually waited for the real answer. It came out that Mike's young daughter had been hospitalized back home, and the medical bills were piling up faster than his crew wages could cover, faster than a payment plan could keep pace with. Robin didn't announce anything. He didn't call a producer or make a scene. Bonnie only found out because she walked past an open production trailer door 2 days later and saw Robin handing Mike a check, telling him firmly to put it toward the hospital and not toward thanking him. Mike tried to argue, his voice cracking. Robin was already changing the subject, asking about the Red Sox, refusing to let the moment sit long enough to become a debt. That was the pattern she would come to recognize in him again and again. Generosity delivered so fast and so sideways that the person receiving it barely had time to feel embarrassed by it. Production moved from the Soundstages of Culver City out to the real town of Keene, New Hampshire, in the winter of 1994, chasing the genuine snow and brick storefronts that no backlot could fake, the church steeples and the frozen ponds that gave the film its heartbeat. Keene was a working town, and 1994 had not been an easy year for towns like it. Mills closing, winters feeling longer than they used to, storefronts sitting empty along the main square. Bonnie remembered how quickly Robin adapted, not as a movie star passing through, but as a neighbor who happened to be there a few months. He ate breakfast most mornings at a small diner near the town square, and within 2 weeks he knew the names of every waitress, every cook, half the regulars at the counter, including a retired school teacher who liked to argue with him about baseball, and a mail carrier who always saved him the corner booth. One of those waitresses was a woman named Diane, raising 2 kids alone on tips and a second job she rarely spoke about. Robin found out anyway. He always found out. It became a quiet ritual, a folded bill left under his coffee cup that was never just a tip. Groceries paid for at the register before Diane could reach her wallet. And on that particular November night, Bonnie witnessed an envelope that Diane would later admit, to almost no one, contained enough to keep her daughter in school clothes and shoes through the rest of that hard winter. He carried that same tenderness onto the set with the children in the cast. Kirsten Dunst was 12 years old that year, Bradley Pierce younger still, and both of them were being asked to run through smoke, water, and roaring animatronics that would have unsettled adults twice their age. Bonnie watched Robin position himself, almost without anyone noticing, between the children and anything that might frighten them, cracking jokes right up until the moment the director called action, so that their last memory before a terrifying stunt was his ridiculous voice, not the machine bearing down on them, not the hydraulic groan of a mechanical rhino charging toward camera. Between setups, he would quiz them on multiplication tables sent over by their on-set tutors, turning schoolwork into a game so neither of them fell behind while the production ran long. Crew members later said he checked in with both kids' parents constantly, asking if the hours were too long, if the effects were too intense, treating their comfort as more important than any shot on the schedule, more important than the studio's deadline. It wasn't performance. There was no camera on him when he did it, no publicist watching from behind Video Village. Bonnie began to understand that the man audiences loved for his chaos was, underneath it, one of the most watchful, careful people she had ever worked with. The production itself was under enormous pressure that winter. The special effects were pushing technology that hadn't fully caught up with the script's ambitions. Reshoots piled onto reshoots, and the New Hampshire cold that December dropped low enough to freeze equipment solid overnight, cameras included. Bonnie remembered whole days lost to malfunctioning rigs, producers pacing with clipboards on the phone to Los Angeles, a sense that the film might be slipping away from everyone's control, that the budget headlines already forming in the trade papers would only get worse. It was Robin, again, who refused to let the discouragement settle. He organized an impromptu snowball fight between takes that pulled in half the crew, producers included. Ties loosened, snow melting down the backs of their collars. He kept a running bit going for nearly a week, where he impersonated the studio executives calling in from Los Angeles, panicked voices asking why the elephants weren't finished yet, why the budget kept climbing. People who had been ready to walk off in frustration found themselves laughing instead, finding one more hour of patience they didn't know they had left. Bonnie said the film would not have survived that winter with its spirit intact if not for him holding the room together, one ridiculous voice at a time. There was one night in Keene, quieter than the rest, that Bonnie kept mostly to herself for years. She was a new mother, balancing a demanding shoot with the ache of missing her daughter back home, and the guilt of it had been eating at her more than she let on to anyone on set, more than she even admitted to herself between takes. Robin found her sitting alone outside the production office, coat pulled tight against the cold, breath fogging in front of her, and instead of a joke, he simply sat down beside her in the snow without asking permission. He didn't try to fix anything. He told her, in a voice she'd rarely heard from him, low and unguarded, that the ache never fully goes away, that it isn't supposed to, that it means you're loving someone the right way. He talked about his own children, about the impossible math of being present for a family and present for a career at the same time, about missed recitals and phone calls made from hotel rooms in cities he could barely name, about the guilt that never quite let go, no matter how many voicemails he left. It wasn't advice so much as company in the hard feeling. Bonnie said she walked back into that production office that night lighter than she'd felt in weeks. Not because anything had changed, but because someone had simply sat beside her in the cold and told her the truth. When filming finally wrapped in Keene that winter, the town turned out to say goodbye in a way few film crews ever experience. Shopkeepers who had barely spoken to actors 2 months earlier came out to shake hands. The hardware store owner, the man who ran the pharmacy, the retired school teacher from the diner counter, the mail carrier who'd saved him that corner booth for weeks. Diane, the waitress, hugged Robin at the diner counter on his last morning, and Bonnie remembered how he ducked his head, almost shy, uncomfortable being thanked out loud after months of making sure no thanks were ever necessary. It would be years before Diane quietly told a mutual friend the full truth of what those envelopes had added up to across that winter. Money that had kept her family steady through a season she still called the hardest of her life. Money that paid for a winter coat, for new boots, and for a Christmas she thought she'd have to skip entirely. Robin never spoke of it, not once, not even to Bonnie directly, not even years later when the film had become a holiday staple. Bonnie only pieced the full story together long after Jumanji had already become a fixture of holiday television, long after the town of Keene had become, in the memory of everyone who filmed there, a little less about elephants and stampedes and a little more about the ordinary kindness that had moved quietly through it. Robin Williams died in August of 2014, and Bonnie Hunt was among the friends and colleagues who spoke about him publicly in the days that followed, careful, as she always had been, about which stories were hers to tell and which belonged only to the people who lived them. She has said in interviews since that what she misses most isn't the improvisation or the impressions, remarkable as they were, but the attentiveness, the way he noticed who in a room was struggling before they said a word, before they even knew it themselves. She still thinks, she has admitted, about that diner in Keene, about an envelope she wasn't meant to see, about a set-dresser's hospital bill quietly settled with a check and a joke about the Red Sox, about a snowy night when a movie star sat down beside a tired young mother in the cold and simply stayed until she felt like herself again. None of it was for cameras. None of it was ever meant to be a story at all, and that, Bonnie has come to believe, is exactly why it matters so much now. But 30 years later, it is the story Bonnie Hunt chose to tell, because she has come to believe it is the truest portrait she has of who Robin Williams really was. Not the wild genius the world remembers from the screen, but the quiet man handing over an envelope and walking away before anyone could say thank you.